All right, great. Thank you. So welcome, everyone. It's good to have even a small group because as we tell one more person and then another person that you see, you can share this information, and that is part of the way that education works. So thank you for taking your time tonight to be in here with us and dig a little deeper about the personhood rights that we find through the Constitution. So I'm Barbara Gerton. I've been involved with Minnesota Move to Amend since 2011 as an organizer, probably since 12 or 13. And Jeff is going to help me. He is co-presenting. He's going to be, we're going to have some slides and he will be putting those up. I am going to be asking you to read some of those slides. So I hope, is there anyone who does not care to read? They're just usually short. There's a couple that are a little bit longer. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to assume all of you will be willing to read. So Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Clark. I live in St. Paul, and I've been with the Minnesota Move to Amend for about the same period Barbara has been, about the last 10 years. I'm a transplant from originally from New York by way of the state of Virginia, where I lived for 24 years. But I only took up this particular cause and got really interested in progressive politics since I've moved here. So in 2010, I think.
It's part of being a Minnesotan.
Yes, I guess it is. Yep. It's
yes.
been
And welcome,
very good for me.
Welcome, Lonnie, right?
I'm Lonnie Screntner. I'm active in the League of Women Voters and Clean Elections Minnesota. I'm a retired social studies teacher.
All right, so let's go around, and Terry, why don't you introduce yourself? We can do this because it's a small group.
Yeah. I'm Terry Burke. I'm also a transplant. We moved up here in 2007 from Chicago, and I've mostly done peace activism since the Central American Wars in the 80s. But recently, once Trump was elected, you can't ignore US politics here. So that's why I'm involved.
Thank you, Terry. And Barbara.
I'm from Chicago, and I'm sort of late to all of this. I have not been that much of an activist in my life or seriously involved. My psychotherapy is my background. And I have not been nearly so active as my brother, who was very much involved, and I sort of watched around the edges. So anyway, I'm here to see what I'm not really an activist, but I am certainly a lot more interested in politics than I used to be. I mean, I always was to some degree, but this seems a little, it's become more important in
Yeah,
last 8 or 10 years.
Yeah,
Thanks.
for sure. Thank you. Don.
Don Fulton. I live in Minneapolis. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, but most of my life I've been here in Minnesota now. I'm a Lutheran clergy. I'm on leave from call right now, so social justice issues fall under that umbrella, of course. And then I'm also a financial coach, and in the organizations that I work with my financial certification, there's a strong emphasis these days on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm just trying to be a sponge, soak up as much as I can, and hopefully don't say the wrong thing in the wrong place, but, help make some positive change.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dave.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave Olson. I am also a transplant from Wisconsin, although I've been in Minnesota over half my life now. I'm a retired engineer, and I've been very active in politics for about 10 or 11 years. And I've been active with the indivisible MNO3 organization since its inception in January of 2017. And through no fault of my own, I ended up somehow as the board chair for the group this year. So it's funny how strange things happen.
Yep, on our journey, we never know what's going to happen. Well, then I just have to add that I'm from Montana, so we're from all over the place. It's kind of fun. So thank you for signing up and being here tonight, and your interest in digging into the history of our country as a democracy, or more correctly, a representative democracy, also known as a republic. So I'm going to do a little bit of background. We're going to have two timelines. There are going to be slides that Jeff's going to put up, and I would like us to in turn read them. So I'm just going to call on you, and you can unmute yourself. And then when you're done reading, mute yourself. And then Jeff will put up the next one, and I'll call on another person. Does that sound like that will work for you? Okay, great. Thank you. And then at the end, there'll be, I have some questions. And then if you have questions about clarification, we'll do that too. I do need to leave right at 8:30. And if there's still conversation, then Jeff is going to take it from there. And of course, if the conversation ends before that, well, we're done early. So for some of you, you could present this material. And for instance, Jeff understands this material and has done this before. And for some of you, this might be a refresher course. And for some of you, it might be like for me in 2010. It was an aha moment. I thought, well, I never knew this. How could I mean, how could I have missed it? Isn't anybody saying anything about this? It just had never come up. And I had been, working in social justice practically all of my life. And I did wonder why so little progress was made on all the issues, mostly in anti-nuclear work, but why such little progress was made. But it was like, oh, wow, I see. So that really channeled me and got me in a different direction, and have been working with Move to Men since then. So there's going to be I'm going to call it a non-human timeline. We're calling it a corporate timeline, but a non-human versus humans to tell the development of our democracy, or the lack of democracy, development of democracy. It's kind of a story of a move toward corporatocracy or plutocracy. These timelines made it clear to me, and I hope that this will help you as well, what is going on. I read Nancy MacLean's book, The Democracy in Chains, and Jane Mayer's Dark Money, and several others when they came out. And I discovered things were worse than I ever imagined. And I was saying, I'm going to talk about those days when I feel like I want to go to the cabin in the woods and just not ever come out. And upon reading those two books, especially, it took me a few days to say, oh, wow, can't do that. Can't do that. I'm an activist, I'm an organizer, and just need to keep going, even in spite of how bad things really are. So after considering it a few days, I'm back, back working. And I really appreciate the organizing that it took to get Nancy MacLean here 2 times, and here meaning in meetings. They were online, both of them, I believe. And in those follow-up gatherings that we've had, Terry's had really, and the group, to educate people, because it is so important. It's essential work. to stopping the decline of the development of democracy. We've never had a true full democracy, but it's a journey, it's a path, but we're backsliding, and indeed in the world. So I thank you for doing that work, Terry and others. So this timeline exercise done in person is very powerful. So I hope it can be as thought-provoking and aggravating, yet energizing tonight. We, meaning Move to Amend, has 3 timelines, and we have the white privilege timeline that we sometimes accompany with this, and done together, honest, it leaves people in tears. Today, we're not doing the white privilege timeline, but we're doing the first 2, the corporate personhood timeline and the human personhood timeline. So to set the stage, so let's start with the definition of democracy. So simply said, from Greek origins, it means the people rule. From here, we ask, what does being a legal person mean? So this is important, as the Constitution is the center or the base of our legal system, and the Constitution begins, we, the people. So when the Constitution was ratified, we, the people, were 5 to 8% of the people. That is, they were white, property-owning men. That's all. There were 5 to 8% were covered by the Constitution. So about 90% of the people, women, poor folks, indigenous, Africans brought here and enslaved as property, indentured servants, these did not count as people. So in order to be protected by the Bill of Rights and subsequent rights in the Constitution, people needed legal personhood status. So we're going to read through the first timeline to follow the development of corporate personhood. In my work, corporate personhood has become the term used to include all legally constructed entities, which is kind of a shame because people think we're only talking about corporate constitutional rights, but we're talking about unions, PACs, associations, LLCs, partnerships, nonprofits, etc., all under the term of legally constructed entities. Those versus a living, breathing human being. So this timeline focuses on for-profit corporations. We did focus on that for the purpose of the timeline. So each taking a turn reading the slides. There's 10 slides in this first section, corporate personhood. So I'm going to I'll go Dave, Terry. Let me write this order down. Dave, Terry, Barbara, Dawn. Dawn and Lonnie. And Jeff, you and I should each take one too.
Okay.
So I'll do the first one and then we'll go to Dave. So go ahead, Jeff. Thank you. So Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad in 1886. Without any formal argument, the court declares a corporation a person with the same rights as human beings. They grant them the 14th Amendment right to equal protection that was supposed to protect recently emancipated Black folks. Justices have since struck down hundreds of local and state and federal laws enacted to protect people from corporate harm because these discriminate against corporations. All right, the next. Okay, Dave, please.
All right. Slide 2 is Hale versus Henkel in 1906. Corporations get Fourth Amendment search and seizure protections. Corporations use this right to demand that regulators get warrants before they can inspect businesses for violations of labor and environmental laws.
All right.
You just read Hale versus Henkel, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And now there's one.
Yeah, it stalled. I see Jeff couldn't move it forward.
Yeah, it was
Oh.
frozen for
Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, 1919.
Yes, okay, Terry's next. Terry, please.
Dodge versus Ford Motor
sorry.
Company, 1919. The Michigan Supreme Court rules that a corporation exists to maximize profits for its shareholders, regardless of the impacts on the planet. I didn't know this. Economy or health and safety. This ruling mandates perpetual growth and practically guarantees human and environmental abuses. Didn't know this. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Barbara.
Oh, Pennsylvania Coal Company versus Mann, 1922. Corporations get Fifth Amendment protections against the government taking their property without compensation. They use this right to argue that any law that infringes on their profit is a takings, and they can sue to recoup all the profits they are making and would have made if the law hadn't passed.
Okay, Don.
Lewis K. Leggett Company versus Lee, 1933. The people of Florida passed a law that levied higher taxes on chain stores than local businesses. The Supreme Court overturned because it discriminated against chain stores and therefore violated corporate 14th Amendment rights to equal protection.
All right, and Lonnie.
Buckley versus Vallejo, 1976. The Supreme Court rules that corporations have First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. Since corporations do not have mouths to speak, the court rules that they speak by spending money in elections. This opened the door to a glut of corporate spending in the political process.
All right, Jeff.
Okay. First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, 1977. Corporations use their First Amendment rights to overturn state restrictions on corporate spending on political referenda. This precedent is used with Buckley versus Vallejo to thwart attempts to remove corporate money from politics.
All right, this one's back to me. Pacific Gas and Electric Company v. Public Utilities Commission in 1986. Although PG&E has a monopoly on utilities in California, they refuse to allow an advocacy group to use extra space on their billing envelope to encourage energy conservation. The court sided with PG&E, upholding the court's right not to speak and protecting what they called the corporation's freedom of mind. And back to you, Dave.
International Dairy Foods Association versus Amistoy in 1996. Supreme Court overturns a Vermont law requiring the labeling of all products containing bovine growth hormone, citing the corporation's right not to speak and extending it to statements of fact as well as statements of opinion. Wow.
Yeah.
And to you, Terry.
Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, 2010. Supreme Court reaffirms that a corporation is a person and states that any restrictions on corporate money in elections violates the corporation's First Amendment right to free speech. This ruling overturned most provisions of McCain-Feingold legislation that restricted corporate money in federal elections and reversed a 100-year precedent of congressional authority to regulate federal elections. Opens the floodgates to unlimited corporate spending in elections. $6 billion was spent in the 2012 election cycle. Open Secrets reports that the political spending in the 2020 election was over $14 billion.
Was that our last slide?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, good. Should I stop presenting for a moment?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That'd be
Okay.
good. Okay. Thank you. So I want you to keep in mind how corporate personhood came about. Started back in 1886 with that Southern Pacific Railway case. And so how that came about while we read through the human personhood slides. So I'm going to start with Barbara. Again, we'll just keep going around. Is this working for everyone? Yep. Okay. So we'll start with Barbara.
Oh, Bill of Rights, 1791. Outraged revolutionaries reject the Constitution as an elite property document and refuse to ratify it unless it contains basic political protections against the tyranny of the state. Their struggle is successful, and they drive through 10 amendments to the Constitution that protect people's rights to freedom of speech, assembly, religion, and the press, as well as others.
All right, Don.
13th Amendment, 1865. Slavery is abolished in the United States and any place subject to its jurisdiction.
And Lonnie.
Civil Rights Act 1866 extended the rights of emancipated African Americans by stating that any person born in the United States, regardless of race, is a U.S. citizen.
All right, thank you. And thank you for saying art, act instead of art.
Right.
We need to change that. All right, Jeff.
14th Amendment, 1868. Black males are now citizens. The law cannot discriminate against them in any way.
All right, and this one's back to me. 15th Amendment, 1870. Black males get the right to vote, yet this struggle continues to this day. And Dave.
All right, social change in 1886, the year that the Supreme Court first gave corporations human rights. This is what the rest of the country was up to. Campaign for the 8-hour workday, Knights of Labor membership, 1 million, with 60,000 Black and even more women members. Farmers Alliance reaches 100,000 members. Populists draw up founding document to demand debtors' rights and fight the railroad lobby. Eugene Debs builds the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen. Das Kapital by Karl Marx, published in English. Police brutalize labor activists in the Haymarket Massacre.
And Terry.
17th Amendment, 1913. The U.S. Senate is now elected by the people instead of appointed by state governments.
And Barbara.
19th Amendment, 1920. Women finally get the vote after 75 years of struggle.
75 years. All right, Don.
Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, 1954. The Supreme Court recognized that separate was not equal and ruled that public schools cannot be racially segregated.
Back to you, Lonnie.
Civil Rights Acts in 1960 established federal inspection of local voter registration polls. 1964 prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin by both federal and state governments. 1968 prohibits discrimination in sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, creed, and national origin.
And Jeff.
24th Amendment, 1964. Abolished poll taxes, which were used to keep blacks and others from voting in some states.
The 26th Amendment, 1971. Voting age changed from 21 to 18 years of age, passed to recognize that if 18-year-olds could be drafted into the military service, they should be allowed to vote. And Dave.
Equal Rights Amendment, not yet enacted. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
And Terry.
We the People Amendment, which has not yet been passed. Artificial entities do not have constitutional rights, and money is not speech. Campaign spending can be regulated.
So let's, I'll do a stack. Are you all familiar with the stack method of having a discussion?
No.
No, so I will, I'll ask a question and then I will ask if anyone wants to respond to it. And you just say your name. For instance, I would say Barbara Stack. And I will just list the people that say that. And then once I have a stack, then I will go back to the top and call on you for your response to the question. And when you're finished speaking, if you say pass, that lets me know that you're done, and then I go on to the next person in the list. So keep in mind, we do have plenty of time tonight, so you can probably take a little bit more time in speaking, but be mindful that we all probably want to respond in some way. So what was new for you and what surprised you the most in those examples of corporate personhood and human personhood? So I'll take a stack. Terry, Dave, Dawn. Did I see somebody else say yes? Is that you, Jeff? Did you?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, Jeff. Barbara or Lonnie, do you want to wait for a bit yet? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Terry, go ahead.
One of them that I read, I didn't realize that corporations could not consider the environment, that they had to first of all consider their shareholders' profits, that took priority. I didn't know that. I thought they had the ability to make that decision themselves. That was really horrifying to learn. Pass.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Dave.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked and amazed, I guess, at the, I mean, I knew that corporations are viewed as legal entities, as essentially as legal persons, but I had no idea that it was such a far-reaching ruling in that the number of constitutional amendments that apply specifically to overturning laws regulating corporations. That's amazing to me. Yeah.
Mhm.
Pass.
Yeah, thank you. Don.
I would say the same thing caught my attention. I thought that the whole corporation as an entity or person or whatever you want to say was a more recent historical thing. I had no idea that there was that much history and how far back that went. And I was also struck by, in the 60s, the number of civil rights acts that came into being, and yet it feels like they haven't been given any enforcement or teeth.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'll pass.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Jeff.
Okay. Two things. First, a remark is follow up to Terry's point about, the profit-making motive being in the ruling. That's the first thing corporations have to do, is to look to their profits and their shareholders. Yeah, I get that. That's why they developed the distinction that would not apply to the benefit corporation or the B Corp, that does have to do some balancing. It would be interesting to see a court ruling that involved one of those corporations and see if the Supreme Court would balance that out. Whereas for many of us, I suppose, if you're a humanist and you think we should be the ones who have rights, the B corporation should be the minimum for what A corporation should be, not a separate category that exists as, ancillary or an adjunct to what corporations usually are. So anyway, that's that comment. The other thing is, the thing that always amazes me when I hear it, because I was a little resistant the first time I heard it until David Cobb, one of the founders of Move to Amend, first said it, and I see it in these slides, is our Constitution, the basic Constitution, is really a property rights document. It's not about people until you get to those first 10 amendments. And I had done a little reading. I want to do a lot more, but the way our education presents the forming of the country, and you people doing the social studies curriculum standards, you should listen to this. The way it's presented, it seems like, okay, there was disagreement and whatnot. There were the Federalist Papers, there were the Anti-Federalist Papers, where people pro and con, but basically we all agreed on the kind of document it was. Well, there were those revolutionaries who were not in the landed class that were pushing for those rights. They wanted that Bill of Rights. Otherwise, they were not going to be on board with the Constitution. Makes you realize that, the founding document was a property rights document with this adjunct of human rights that should apply to people. And the irony is, won that battle, but down the road, corporations have been added to what people are. And when you think that our basic document is a property rights document, it seems almost a no-brainer that we've been heading down the road we are since the Santa Clara decision, the first one, the railroad decision that started establishing corporations as being people, because that's the property continuing via the Constitution to be empowered. So I'll pass with that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I'm glad you mentioned Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. So that case it's very convoluted. So the judge had been a prior attorney for the railroads, and his court reporter had also been an employee of the railroads. So this was a tax case about fences on railroad property. I don't know much about that case, but so Judge Waite walks into the courtroom. There had been another case, and Jeff, do you remember the case that was just earlier? It was also
No, I don't remember it.
So this particular case, he walks in and he says something like, well, this case is not about whether corporations are people or not, because indeed we believe they are. And so the court reporter writes this in the head notes. That's the only place it is. Well, and today head notes are not part of a legal decision. But for years, those head notes were referred to as the deciding statement, legally binding statement that corporations were people. We do have a little theatrical piece about that. Something of Justice Wade. We haven't done it for a long time, but it talks about how that came about. It was very convoluted. It never really was decided, but the head notes, I mean, it's kind of like collusion, right? they put it in the head notes, and then they use the head notes as legal decision. So anything about that you can add, Jeff?
No, I think you've just about captured it. It was now the background I understand is the justices deciding the Santa Clara case. They didn't say anything about corporations being considered to have the rights of people, but they were, at least one of them, I think, I forgot who the Supreme Justice was at that, the Chief Justice at that point, but they did say they were inclined to think so. But this case didn't deal with that, the issue of their own personal prejudices or thinking on that matter. It was only the head note, the guy who wrote the head note and who had worked for a railroad, a little serendipity there on the side, or a connection between the two. It was, yeah, as you said, it was him who put that in there, and the justices apparently let it stand, or no one noticed it. But ever since down the years, it's been cited as that's the case that decided corporate personhood, when it really didn't, not the case itself.
Yeah, thank you. And another thing now, Terry, you mentioned the profit-making motive. Now you will start to notice it in news reports, financial reports of or about business reports. You'll start to hear, you'll see that language and hear that language more, because I hadn't remembered that either, but now I hear it all the time. It's just common jargon. Although there is pushback, and that's socially something, investing. What was that called? It's been around for a few years, decades.
Social responsible investing.
Yes. So there is pushback against that, but in the courts, a stockholder would take, the precedent is that there's some stockholders, what's it called? Stockholder. It's got a name now too. But anyway, that primacy, that they exist primarily for the benefit of stockholders. So does anyone want to add more to this conversation? Barbara or Lonnie, perhaps?
Oh, I was just struck by the same thing that other people were, which is the long development toward personhood by various amendments. So I had thought Citizen United was a sudden change, very naively.
I think
I also wanted to ask, what are head notes?
Okay, so thank you for asking that. We'll go to Jeff for that, and then Lonnie, I'll come back to you, or to anybody else. If you could just say your name, and then I'll call on you to speak, but go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, I'm not sure I can give you a precise legal definition, but the head note is kind of like an abstract or a summary for the case, saying what it was about and how it was decided. And that's where the error was put in, because it wasn't about corporations being people.
I see.
But yeah, it was supposed to be like a summary or an abstract you find for an academic article, something like that, only very short, short paragraph usually. And if you actually look up the Santa Clara decision, I wouldn't want to try to do it on the fly here while we're in this thing. You would find it listed with the head note.
Mhm. Yeah,
Pass. Yeah.
thank you. Anyone else want to add to this? Okay, go ahead, Lonnie. Anyone else before Lonnie starts? Anybody else want to add more? No? Okay, go ahead, Lonnie.
I think it's interesting that even before that 1886 decision, corporations are buying US senators with money. I mean, they are bribing state legislatures to appoint the people they want to the US Senate, which was the purpose. I mean, I think it came up in the first timeline, the amendment that gives people the power to elect their US senators instead of them being appointed by state legislatures, which is what's in the original Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the system was not working well even before. That there was still bribery taking place and yeah, but then once corporations, they became people, they had due process and other protections within the amendments to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So just to go back to the two, the way that corporations got personhood versus how we moved from what, 5 to 8% to, well, we're still not really at 100%, but most people, can you see the difference of how that came about? Does anybody want to comment on that? Or I could say more. What struck you about the difference? Okay, we'll go to Dawn. We'll take Dawn first, but anybody else want to talk about that a little bit? Have some comments? Oh yeah, I see Lonnie. I see your hand up. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say.
And Jeff? Okay, Dawn, we'll go to you first.
This might take it in a little bit of a different direction or interpretation, but when you talk about the 5/8%, I got a little confused because somewhere in all the history, people of color were considered not 100% human. And I want to say that like 5/8 was kind of the percentage that was used to describe them. So I just want to be clear about that. And then this whole thing is striking me of going from corporations and profit and that slavery mentality that, you know, even people are property, and that seems to be infused through the whole timeline. And I feel like it needs to be separated out. So pass.
Okay, so just making myself a note here. Okay, Lonnie.
The evolution of who gets to vote. By about 1830, with people like Andrew Jackson and even Thomas Jefferson, who believed in the common man, white man, being allowed to vote. By the 1830s, most states had gone to a system where white males over the age of 21 were being allowed to vote. And so that seems like this great growth in common sort of democracy. But the fact that you're not allowing women or African Americans or indigenous people to vote is just sort of pushed off to the side. Pass.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, to sort of follow up on Lonnie's point, that's what I was going to say that struck me is, you know, when I look at this, we look at all of this from our vantage point where we are, despite all the troubles we have and the imperfect society we have that's still trying to achieve true representative democracy. And it seems like logically at the beginning from our perspective, rather than the cultural perspective of the times when the Constitution was created and the country was forming, that why do all these different people, especially, well, just start with the white ones and the ones who were women as well as men, why didn't they have these rights at the beginning? And it did not seem as logical to the powers that be that formed the Constitution, and even the revolutionaries of the lower classes who got those first 10 amendments into the Constitution. I haven't read much about their attitude about voting, but they were willing to live with the fact that they couldn't yet vote unless they also owned land, despite their status. And it just, all of this had to develop into being. And yet on the opposite end, corporations used to be chartered at the beginning, and they were created for a purpose, like to build a bridge. People can get together in a formal organization, pool their money, limited liability, but they would take on that project. Corporations, though, could have a natural end. They do their purpose if it was only to build a bridge or something, and then they dissolve. Or if they had an ongoing service that they provided, they would still have to be reviewed and renewed periodically. All of that has gone by the wayside as corporate rights have developed, with them being considered persons. And as they develop full persons, it doesn't matter the nature of the corporation or the artificial entity, it would have those rights. How it's developed, though, it's actually devolved. We're talking about the big ones, the multinationals or national corporations. They're in courts. No court has ever ruled, and I don't think any counsel has ever argued during the case, for example, a labor union being a non-person entity, an artificial entity, that it would have rights like a corporation does, because it would be considered a person also. Those things don't come up. And labor unions, in fact, are a creature of the law. They're written into the law as it is, the rights that labor has. Different kind of organization from a corporation. But even nonprofits or smaller corporations, your mom and pop corporate, other things, these people never get into court situations where they're argued to have the rights of a person, like major ones do. And it's just, it's so, I don't know, it's amazing, but somehow logical that out of that document we had, corporations should gradually accrue rights, not have to answer to a charter anymore, and they'll do it all faster than all of us who are struggling from various ethnicities and groups to get our rights to on the book. I'll pass with that.
Really is, you know, we're nurses, and whenever we talk to patients.
All right. So welcome to whoever just joined us. Thank you.
Yeah, that's T.O. Otten.
Okay.
T.O. Welcome, T.O. I guess I'm going to ask you just to kind of absorb some of the discussion, and then you'll get a chance to ask a question or share your thoughts and observations. So I wanted to go back to this corporation versus people becoming part of we the people. So the corporations go through the courts. There's no I mean, it's a relatively simple thing. I don't know how many years they've been thinking of this, and there have been some other cases. There was one about Dartmouth College prior to this, so he was kind of building up to that. But then think about like 75 years for women to get the right to vote. So all of the groups of people that were able to eventually become part of we the people took long movements, loss of blood, taking to the streets. So it's a hard task for human people to become part of we the people. So that's the one thing that I find so noticeable. That I mean, obviously a corporation can't, stand in the streets and hold a sign. So obviously they're not people, but even though they say they are. So now we'll do another round. If anyone else wants to add comments based on other people's comments, I'll take a stack. Okay, I see Dave. Anyone else? Terry? Anyone else? No? Okay, so we'll go to Dave and then Terry. Go ahead, Dave.
All right. I have a question, and maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but I know that people's rights seldom move in a linear fashion. The law zigs and zags around periodically. And it seems that now there is a great deal of concern about the possibility of non-citizens voting. And I'm wondering if that has always been the case. And in part, I wonder that because on my father's side, I'm second generation American. Both my paternal grandparents emigrated from Norway. And eventually, after they got married, they owned a farm. But I don't think they ever became naturalized citizens. In fact, my grandfather never learned English. But I've often wondered whether they were allowed to vote if people in their circumstances, were just assumed to be part of the community, in a rural community in North Dakota, for example, because they were, white people, Scandinavians. They wouldn't stand out from the general populace much, and they were landowners at that time. Hey, any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm interested in the response to that because I do not know the answer, but I see Lonnie is a history teacher, so she's got the answer there. I see your hand up. Go ahead. I'm gonna have Lonnie respond, and then Terry, I'll come to you. Is that okay? Okay, so go ahead, Lonnie.
The bottom line is it depended on the state, Dave. But particularly eastern states and a lot of western states who were looking for enough citizens to apply to become a state were giving, in fact, Wyoming is the first state, which is amazing today when you think about where Wyoming is on the political spectrum, but they were the first state to give women the right to vote. Because if they gave women the right to vote, they could count them as citizens and they could become a state faster. But the answer to your question is that it depended on the state, but in a lot of states, ward bosses met immigrants at the boat and said, let's get you voting. And they'd take them back to the ward hall and feed them their first meal on American soil. Now, a lot of that takes place before the existence of Ellis Island, when immigrants simply walked off the boat into the morass of whatever city it was they were landing in. Many of them didn't intend to stay in the city, but many of them ended up there because they couldn't afford to go any further. You know, they were lucky if they could come up with the money for their ship passage. So yes, a lot of illegals got to vote.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So there's a lot of history we don't know. We continue to learn, but it always just boggles my mind that we know so little. I know so little. I'll speak for myself. I know so little, but thank you. Terry, what was your comment or question?
Well, I'm referring to what Jeff was just talking about, that, well, corporations have gone to court and used their personhood status to argue cases. You said that labor unions and nonprofits had not done that. So a labor union has never taken advantage of that part of the law to argue a case against a corporation. Is there a reason they've never used it, or?
Okay, go ahead.
It would
and
seem
answer
to their
that.
advantage.
Yeah. I thought that for the longest time. I wasn't sure about that. They'd never done it, but I've seen recently some of the writing that came from the national move to amend that supports that and says that's the case. I think, well, one thing is the labor union, or I suppose is there another kind of union? But at any rate, it's a fundamentally different kind of organization, because it's like everybody who's in the union has skin in the game in a way that a stockholder in a corporation does not. They're defined by law rather than being an entity that was created to make money or provide a service. They provide a service to those people who are in the union to get them better working conditions and wages and so on. But the fundamental thing I think that the courts have found is, because of what they're composed of, which is members, the rights that the union has are primarily invested in the individuals, so that their individual Bill of Rights type rights and others, or what the union as an entity doesn't have those rights. The individual members have it. So it's like the hive doesn't have the rights. The ants in the hive or something individually have them, is the way it's interpreted. The irony I've always saw is that if you're considering any kind of artificial entity as being a person, the closest thing to it would be a union or workers' cooperative or something like that, because everybody has complete skin in the game. They're an owner as well as the people who produce the labor and the product or service kind of thing. But I think that's the main reason that unions were dealt with in the law, is that they weren't a formal entity that required a charter or something the same way as a company does. Pass with that.
Okay. Wow, there was something I was going to say. But PAC, so just the idea of a legally a developed entity like PACs, political action committees, that are funding a lot of campaigns. They are a corporation. Nonprofits or corporations, they're all organized that way, but it's and as a move to amend, and from our organization, we're not anti-corporation, but it seems like it's these big corporations that have money that can go to court and argue their case within the framework of the Constitution, that we have protection in the 14th Amendment with due process, those kinds of things. So they start out from the advantage of having the dollars to take these cases to court and be successful. So, and I would guess that maybe some of those others would do it too if they had a case that would help them leverage their constitutional rights. All right, so I just want to ask Tio and Alice if you have heard enough that you would like to make some comments. You can unmute yourself and I hear a little puppy dog.
Oh, that's my cat.
Oh, that's your cat. Okay. Okay, I guess not. So it is 8:09. I'm always conscious of the time.
Barbara, Alice unmuted. If Alice wanted to say
Oh, I
something.
didn't see that. Okay, go ahead, Alice. Thank you.
Mrs. Farrell, I really have a question, and I couldn't tune into this until a few minutes ago. So I'm just getting the tail end of it here.
Mhm.
I'm sorry I missed it.
Okay, well, you'll be glad to know that it's being recorded.
Oh,
Mhm.
So you'll be able to
okay, good.
get caught up going to YouTube. So Dave, how does that happen? That will you be sending a link to everyone who is participating tonight with to the YouTube where it's posted on YouTube?
Yes, typically what I would do is post the video on the Indivisible MN03 YouTube channel, and then I'd send out a link to it to everyone who registered for the event.
Wonderful. So there you'll have it. And so if you felt like even the rest of us who feel like we might have missed something, you can go back and review it. Okay, so
Barbara, 1 second. And two, I haven't sent out an email lately to the 350 people who registered for the Nancy McLean event. So I could include this in that email with other kinds of news and upcoming events.
Be great.
So we'll send it out to a much larger group.
Sure,
Great.
sounds good.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so let's look at another. So this is looking forward rather than now we have this history. So do you think that corporate and big money power can be contained, regulated by us human persons? And how could this be done? Do we have hope? Okay, I see hands going up right away. So I see Dawn and then Dave. Okay, who else wants to be on stack? No hands up? Okay, we'll go to Dawn first and then Dave.
Before you mentioned social responsible investments, which I would see as one avenue to give people more say in comparison to a corporation. And in fact, in my financial work, I've been part of different groups where that has actually been the intention, to say, okay, we're only going to put our investments in companies that have policies that are fair towards their employees and hire minorities and so forth. So it's a effort to be more equitable and use that as the means. I think what we're doing here, and the more education that people can have about this history and understand how we've got to where we are, I think that's extremely helpful. It's not where I want to be. I think we got a long ways to go. And it's frustrating that we can't be there for everybody. But I think that's a goal we don't want to lose sight of. And with that, I'll pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Dave.
Yeah, maybe your presentation and the discussion is leading us to an answer, but it seems to me that given the cascade of legal judgments over the years, legal rulings, that legislation won't do the trick. I mean, it can always be overturned by the courts. Right now, about the best that we have is public pressure in terms of rallying people to boycott corporations who do horrible things, or getting fund managers to disinvest from things like fossil fuel, or but short of a constitutional amendment, that's about the only mechanisms that we have, it seems to me. I don't know. And I guess with that, I'll pass.
Mhm. Yeah, great. This is, okay, go ahead, Jeff. I'm going
No,
to.
I don't want to interrupt you if you want to finish your thought first. So.
No, I've got the note down now. I'll remember.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
But as a follow-up to what Dave was saying, yeah, just with the present makeup of the Congress, or even the type of situation it is in, where money rules politics, besides the rights that corporations get. See, what we've always been talking about is there's a two-part solution. The one that's most public is the idea that big money is corrupting our politics. It's shaping who we get to vote for in elections, grooming the candidates, and then the big money keeps them in line doing what corporations or wealthy individuals want, because they'll say, I'll give you more money if you keep doing it, and if you don't, I'll support your opponent at the next election. But in the meantime, so they could get legislation through people they groom to get in office. But the other thing is they have to work with the laws that we have both federally and locally in our states and in our municipalities and everything else. In the meantime, that's where a lot of these cases that come up that indicate the different kinds of amendments that corporations can use if they're considered people, to avoid accountability. Remember the takings clause, I think we mentioned in one of the things that a law couldn't stand if it took some profit that was due that corporation. Search and seizure laws are being used when they don't want to give up certain records that would be incriminating, that sort of thing. All of those rights through the Constitution, while they are considered people, help them avoid or thwart existing laws meant to control our activities for the benefit of society and the environment and everything else, all the things we deal with. So it's like it's a two-part solution, but it does have to be dealt with either in an amendment that's not as variable as a law or a set of laws. And it would establish the playing field on which a Congress would then have to create new laws to overcome or to indicate what the privileges are of corporations that they lost when they stopped having rights under the constitutions when they were persons. But the thing is, we could be headed in that direction someday. The other thing is we could be headed for a rewriting of the Constitution. Because there are forces that are gearing toward that. And that's why those of us who are more progressive need to be prepared for that. And there are efforts underway to construct what a true people's constitution would be like. And that's something we can learn a lot more about, because that may be where we'll end up with before we end up with our or any other kind of amendment that dealt with money in politics and corporate rights. We may be headed for a revamping of everything. That's what the Koch brothers would really, or, using that term generically, Koch brothers, that's what that network would really like, is a rewriting of the Constitution. So I don't mean to be too dire, but it's hard to do that after Nancy McLean anyway.
Yes, for sure. So, Jeff, you mentioned the takings clause. So just to let you know that this work that corporations is doing to assert their right in these amendments. Just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court ruled on another case, and it was a labor organizing for farm workers. And for a number of years, it's since Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were organizing, it was permitted that organizers could go into the farm fields to talk to workers. I think this case has ruled that they no longer can do that because it's under the takings clause that they're keeping these corporations that produce the food from maximizing their profit. They're taking from them. So I wanted to put that one on the slide, but I didn't have time to look at it, but it just occurred just within the last couple weeks. So, all right, Don has his hand up. Does anyone else want to put their hand up? Okay, just Don and Alice. Anyone else after Alice? Okay, we'll go to you, Don.
Well, I just wanted to pass to Alice because I could see she wanted to ask something. So go ahead, Alice.
Thank you for helping. Okay, Alice, go ahead.
Very short. These ideas and so on that are being tossed around in different groups. I've been involved with Minnesota for Clean Elections, and I've learned a lot. But because I've been involved, I've learned. And then I go to breakfast with a friend who is not involved and busy being a grandma or a grandpa and so on, and other things to do. And they're not familiar with these ideas. There's a great amount out there in the public who aren't aware of any of these things. And so what I'm saying, and if I remember right, your question was, how can we get these things across to people, or what can we do then to make this, resolve this situation? And I think we have to educate our friends and family and neighbors, and as much as possible. Not everybody's interested. I understand that. But I think there are a lot of people who would be if they, just touch on it a little bit and so on. Because if anything goes to the legislature for a vote, they need support. And they're not getting support on a disclosure law bill, for example, in Minnesota. I don't think that's getting, because people don't know what it is. I can talk to all of you know. And all of these friends of mine over here know, but there's a great deal who don't know. And I think we need to promote some of these ideas. They're so good and they're so necessary. So that's all.
Thank you, Alice. Yes. So I'm going to respond to that question. And I too, it's the education, the learning things that, like, aha, when I heard this, it was like, well, no wonder, things, in social justice work, it hardly makes a difference. And it's like, wow, well, I don't know. I never heard of this before. All these years, and it was brand new to me. So yes, I think this education is one of the ways that we can change this. But wow, what a task that is, and how do we do it? I'm not an educator, and I wished I had some magic to really get more people really interested in their own civic education, what it is to be a citizen, and how important it is, and how by not making it important, that powers that have much more money and influence, control the messages, are actually becoming the ones who are the power leaders in the country. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So I see it is 8:23. And so we're just going to do one last go around, and maybe this is a little bit too close to the question I just asked, but well, what gives you hope? What gives you hope? I know for me that reading those two books, Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean and Jane Mayer's Dark Money, whoa, it made things seem so dire to me that, like I said, for a few days, I did not have hope. And I just thought, oh, I'm just going to go and live in the woods and just, that's as good as I can do. But somehow I was born with genes that, you just got to be in there and keep going. So after a few days of thinking I'd go to the woods, I decided, well, no, I got to keep going. And so it's people like you who are on this call that feel compelled as well, that we just can't let things be thwarted by big money, by power of corporations. So my hope is in telling and educating more and more people. So here tonight we have 9 people that some are hearing some of this for the first time, and there's so much to know. So we'll go around. Dave, Jeff, Barbara, Don, Lonnie, Tiho, Alice. So Dave, what gives you hope?
Well, I think what gives me hope is the spontaneous development of all these activist organizations. And there are so many people who are members of more than one. There's a great cross-fertilization of ideas, but whether it's a climate group like MN350 or Common Cause or any of the indivisible groups, or even political party groups, caucuses within states. And I feel these are real grassroots organizations, not like the Tea Party, which was, funded and encouraged by others for nefarious purposes. But these are real grassroots organizations that it shows how interested people are, how concerned they are, and how much they want to improve things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what gives me hope.
Thank you, Dave. All right, Jeff, let's keep in mind the amount of time we have left.
Okay.
3 minutes, I might go over a little bit.
What Dave said is that's what gives me optimism too, is the variety of grassroots activity. And the one thing we can all do is educate ourselves more to see what we have in common as we work, rather than just remaining in our silos, that some issues affect us all. And this question of money and politics and corporate power is one of those things that conditions the progress we can make in those individual grassroots efforts. And it's why we should always keep that in mind and keep our legislators' feet to the fire, because we know at least as much as them when they're trying to shine us on rather than solve problems. I'll pass with that.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Barbara. You're muted. Oh, there.
Right. Yeah. Personally, I don't have much hope, but what does give me hope is people like you who are really working at it and do have some hope and are finding things to do, and I may get in there on the fringes. And that's about it.
Great.
And my age is such that I wish you all well.
Thank you. We need your support. So you're here tonight.
Yes,
well, it's very important. All right. Thank you, Barbara. Terry.
Terry. Oh,
Barbara, thanks for coming. That you give us hope by coming. Nancy McLean said that
Glad
if
to be here, and
we
I
each
have
tell
her.
5 people,
Hmm.
if we each tell 5 people, you know, that can really mushroom. And I think we do need our elevator speech. How do we tell people in a minute, you know, this is important? I'm working on a 2-page summary of some of this with the McLean information, and hopefully we can send something out with the next mailing. But letters to the editor and op-eds, my op-ed just got rejected, but you know, the Star Trib does sometimes print our letters if you have something referencing something they've written. But I think that's a good way to start to get the message out. And thanks for doing this, Barbara.
Thank you, Terry. All right, Don.
I would just repeat the emphasis on education, collaborating with other like-minded groups that share the same mission, and also, as we have these opportunities to gather, be sure that we're inviting others to join and be part of the conversation. With that, I'll pass.
Great, thank you, Don. Lonnie.
I think what gives me hope is the number of younger people who are becoming involved. If you go to an Indivisible meeting, there are bunches of 30 and 40-year-olds. If you look at college campuses, there are organizations springing up or chapters of organizations that have been dormant for decades that are coming back. If you look at high schools, I mean, our high school has a high school chapter of the League. There's both young Republicans, young Democrats. There are probably 10 organizations that didn't exist when I retired that are there now and are active. And I think that gives me hope.
Great. Young people. Good. Thank you. Tiho?
A couple of things that give me hope, echoing first what Dave said, and then what Lonnie said about the young people. The other thing is some of these corporations, the generation of the people that believe that oligarchy is the way to go and they own the right to own everything, they're aging out. There are shareholders that are making differences in companies now. That's a huge thing that I don't think gets enough notice when you start seeing CEOs in their 50s and 60s whose kids are like, Dad, why is your company doing this? Because it's not, they're of the generation of their kids participated in everything. So they actually have dialogues as opposed to the previous generation where the kids were always seen but not heard and stay out of the news and that type of stuff. That's actually happening. And I don't think it gets enough attention sometimes that there are just, I don't know if I want to use the word organic changes, but some of the people who've been pulling all the strings behind this, they're all aging out and their kids aren't necessarily, their successors don't view the world the same way they do. And I think that is going to be part of the solution going forward.
Wow. Yeah. I'd like to know more about that. That sounds good. Thank you. Alice.
Well, I agree with Lonnie, and I, during this pandemic, sneaked into a few restaurants that were hanging on during the winter, especially with doors flapping in the wind and people sitting with their winter jackets on and gloves eating their hamburgers. It was pretty interesting. Now, those are young people mainly who help those restaurants stay in business. And sometimes I was the only one in the restaurant, and maybe I shouldn't have been, but there I was. And talking to some of these servers who are going to college or were going, and now they're picking it up again. There's a lot of young people working hard at different things, and they may not know the things that we've talked about tonight, but they know an awful lot. And they know what they want pretty much, and they're going after it, and they know they have to work hard. But I know this one restaurant nearby, they have learned so much, and I learned so much from them in our little talks, because like I said, I was sometimes the only one in there for 2-3 hours. We had some really nice conversations. It's amazing how much they know.
All right. Yes. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate you being here, learning with us, and carry on.
Yeah.
Be at the next one. Terry, I know, is planning another one, a follow-up. So
Right.
listen or watch for it and join again. All right. Thank you and good night.
Thank you all. Good night.